we get started. I don't know if you can read my T-shirt. It says, reading other people's T-shirts is cool. Reading the Bible is even better. So I thought that was appropriate for tonight. Plus, I like reading people's T-shirts and things too. So, first thing, this will be the last night in Genesis. So somebody needs to figure out where we're gonna go next. Somebody there on the online can send something in or whatever. We can continue through Exodus, kind of keep the story going. We can go to a gospel, or we can do what's called a synoptic view, where we look at all of them in line together, see how they compare and what they say about it, all those kind of things, or something else. And it doesn't matter to me. So everybody's got I started to say a week. Don't wait a week. Let me know. Give me some suggestions or whatever. So far we've done Revelation, Acts, Ruth, Genesis. I think, is that all of them?
I think so.
So we've done a little bit of everything. So anyway.
A couple people have suggested Exodus.
Okay. She said a couple of people have mentioned Exodus. That's fine. It just kind of, whatever. So, and then also just a couple of prayer updates. Dylan Price has to have a bone marrow test tomorrow. He's the 16-year-old that we've had on the prayer list for a while. The problems with his blood counts going down. They're going to do that to find out, see if they can figure out what's going on, what they need to do, kind of set them a benchmark, all that kind of stuff. Danny Price did a little bit better every day. And then Amber had her baby this week, and things seem to be going pretty well, a lot better than was expected in the beginning. So that's all good. And then Randall's family, his dad's getting ready to move out of their home that they had here in Rockville. He's got to go into an apartment for a while because he was supposed to go into a condo, a senior citizen place, and it's not ready. So they've got to put him in an apartment for a while. So just all that change and everything with the family and the move and his mom's birthday, it's kind of stressful on that whole clan. So keep them in your prayers. And so let's pray. Gracious Lord, we thank you for this evening. And Lord, for this place to gather in, for all that have gathered with us in whatever place they're in. And we just thank you for being with us on this night, and that we can pray to you for these folks that are on this list, Lord, and we just look them all up before you. We're thankful that for the ones that are getting better, and this baby and everything that's going on with it. Lord, we just thank you for your word and what it teaches us and what it shows us. And we just ask that you help us to know the truth that's in it, and let us see the things that you want us to know. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are in Genesis 50. We're ready for verse 4, but we'll kind of give a synopsis. It's been 17 years since Jacob and all the other boys, the other 11, with a total of 70 that came down to be with Joseph in Egypt. He put them in Goshen, which we call the Nile Delta, and put them there to raise livestock and all those things. And so it's been 17 years since that all occurred. Joseph has been taking care of them. Joseph, of course, is the second most popular or powerful person in Egypt. Only the Pharaoh has more power than Joseph. Joseph got called to his father's bedside that things were getting bad. So he gets there, and what we had in 49 was Jacob or Israel pronouncing the blessing, or the laying out what was going to happen with the 12 tribes, with his sons, their sons, and what would come of them and as history moves on. And so when he had done that, and he wanted to make sure that he was going to be buried in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah and Leah were all buried, then he basically drew his feet up into his bed, breathed his last, and died. Joseph threw himself upon him, kissed him. Jacob had been promised before he left Canaan to go down with Joseph 17 years earlier that Joseph would be with them and would be the one to close his eyes, and we see that came into effect. Joseph had his father Jacob embalmed, not from the religious standpoint, but from secular physicians, and it took a total of 40 days. They mourned for a total of 70 days, including that 40, so it would have been that 40 and another 30. And the Egyptians also mourned for Joseph's father. And when you stop and think about it, that's not that unusual. If there was a dignitary of that magnitude in our country, and they had a parent that died, there would be a lot of people would mourn with them here as well. And so it just. It stands to reason, and you see that at times. I mean, if you think back, probably, I was trying to think of an example, and about the only one I could come up with that was really big like that. There really was somebody that was brought in, wasn't part of the royal family, and all that was when Princess Diana died. And basically the whole world was mourning over that and everything. So that's kind of, that would have been that sort of thing. So now we're ready for verse 4. Pick up where we left off. So, when the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court, "If I've found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father, then I will return." Pharaoh said, "Go and bury your father as he made you swear to do." So Joseph went up to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials accompanied him, the dignitaries of his court and all the dignitaries of Egypt. Besides all the members of Joseph's household and his brothers and those belonging to his father's household, only their children and their flocks and herds were left in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very large company. So the 70 days, or at least the 40 days, were over. The 70 days. Well, it said when the days of mourning were over. Those 70 days are over. And now, who does Joseph approach about going back to Canaan?
Pharaoh's court.
Yeah, he doesn't go straight to Pharaoh, which at first seems kind of odd. But there could be a couple of things that plays into it. One of them could be that he's afraid that he may, if it's him, he may insult Pharaoh, because Pharaoh's been so good to him and to his family and all that. Pharaoh gave them the land, which was considered the best of the land in Egypt, and all those sort of things. And so, are you going to insult him? Is he going to get his feelings hurt? Jacob not wanting to be buried there. And so is it something like that? I don't know. Or the other thing that it may have been was that if he's in a period of mourning, he may have been, what's the word? When you're mourning, when they were mourning back then, there's the dust and ashes. You didn't comb your hair. You didn't take care of yourself. You didn't, that was so that everybody could see you were mourning. Well, when you appeared before the Pharaoh, or basically any king, you had to be cleaned up, washed up, all those. So he may not have been presentable. That's the word. He may not have been presentable to Pharaoh. So, and when he says, "If I found favor in your eyes," do you think he's already found favor in their eyes? It's just the way that a lot of terms were put, and it's kind of what we call rhetorical questions. There's a lot of the Bible is written in that way, but it basically means, since I've found favor in your eyes. Speak to Pharaoh for me. Would you do me a favor and go talk to Pharaoh? And he, just like a lot of other things, Joseph knows what to tell him, right? He knew what to tell his brothers to tell Pharaoh, and all the rest. And so he says, tell him. Don't just go and ask him if it's okay. Here's what you need to tell him. So Joseph was always, if there was a man with a plan in the Bible, it was Joseph. He had a plan for everything. And so who does he lay all this on in case Pharaoh does get upset?
His dad.
My father. you know, he said, tell him, my father made me swear an oath, you know, and Pharaoh would have understood the importance of the father, or the dying father. And so, you know, he said, and he tells him the oath, I'm about to die, bury me in the tomb I dug for myself. There's not a request, right? It's not a would you please, or see if you can. It was do it. And so he's kind of laying it out there for Pharaoh. For Pharaoh's either got to say, yeah, that's fine, or I really don't care what your dad had to say. Which, one of the things that we see sometimes when we start talking about Pharaohs, we always think of the Pharaoh in Exodus, or there's a couple other that figure in later on in the with the kings, and one of them killed good King Josiah in battle, and all that kind of stuff. But this Pharaoh seemed to be a really good guy, and the things that he did, the stuff he did, even here, the way he treats Joseph, the way he treated Joseph's family, and all that, and he's already been treating them with kindness, and so Joseph's laying them out for that, and that it's not just a tomb. He doesn't want to just go back and be buried in Canaan. He wants to be where? In the tomb I dug for myself. Did he dig it? No, he bought it already dug. And so, in other words, and so what's that say? Family tomb. I've already dug it. It's already there. You know, this isn't something that's just come about. He's not. It also comes into. It's not that he's against Egypt. This is, you know, before he ever came here, he had the tomb. It's where he wants to be. It's where he's from. So Joseph is setting it all up. My father made me swear, gave an order, already had the grave before he ever came to Egypt, and all of that. So what's Joseph throw on it at the end?
That if he does this, then he'll return.
Well, no, he says, then I'll return. Yeah, as he does it, he'll return, right. And so do you think there was really a chance of him not coming back? Yeah. Probably not. But it's one of those, you know, you can even take it by, he's reassuring Pharaoh, you know, I'm not here to take off with the family. We're not all going to go back to the land of Canaan and stay there, because it's going to be the whole bunch of them that goes, you know, I'm going to return. It also means, you know, I'm not going to be there for a long time. It's not going to be a year or two before I come back. I'm just going to go there to bury him and return. So does that sound like anything today? People come home from wherever long enough to bury him, and they go back home, right? So some things never change. So, and, you know, this is about 4,000 years ago, about 1,600 years ago, or 3,600 years ago, 1,600 years before Christ. So what's Pharaoh say?
Go bury your father.
Yeah, as he made you swear to do. So I'm okay with it. Since your father made you swear to do it, you just go ahead and do it. Now, some people see this as, you know, Joseph sends the entourage, somehow the court, to go ask Pharaoh, is it okay? But Pharaoh comes back to Joseph. I don't know that it really says that. I think it's just, it could also state Pharaoh's answer was. But it does sound like he's talking in first person. But Joseph sounded like he was talking in first person when he was given the orders. Go tell Pharaoh that my father told me. You know, those are the kind of things that you say. So Pharaoh is saying, go ahead. And now there are some that think that Pharaoh, being the kind of nice guy that he seems to be, that he may have come to Joseph in that, just to let Joseph know that he was with him. But you got to remember, they were a long ways off. It wasn't getting in the chariot and riding 20 minutes down the road. This would have been a day or two trip there and back. So chances are Pharaoh just sent word, said, yep, fine, go for it. So Joseph goes up to bury his father. And who goes with him?
Pharaoh's officials. All of them.
Yeah. Pharaoh's officials accompanied Joseph, the dignitaries of his court, and all the dignitaries of Egypt. Now, you can kind of read that in a couple of ways. Pharaoh's court and Joseph's court. Joseph would have had a court, or what we would call today a staff, and all those, and would have been some pretty big dignitaries. Joseph couldn't be doing everything that he did. I mean, it's just like, if you take the president's cabinet in Washington, whether it's Department of Transportation, Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security, they don't do everything. They run the programs, and they got people underneath them and every one of them has a chief of staff, and other people that are there. So it was probably that. Do what?
It's just been the men, right? It's just been the men that would have gone.
Yeah, well, kind of, sort of, but the dignitaries of the courts would have been men, and so because it says all the dignitaries of court and all the dignitaries of Egypt, and who else went? Joseph's household, his brothers, and all the households belonging to his father's household. Now, there's a little bit of a difference, or you got Joseph's household, because Joseph was living in a different place. Joseph is living back where Pharaoh's at. So, he's not down with the family, so his whole household would have been separate. He's living in a different town. He has relocated, as some of them say today. And everybody else, it says his brothers and all of his father's household, because his brothers, up till the time of the death, the brothers were considered part of the father's household. The patriarch was the one who was in charge of the whole family for everything, and that was even down through Jesus' day and all of that. So until old Dad died, what was that show it was on several years ago? Old Dallas, that everybody lived in the house where Dad lived, and that was kind of that same thing. They all would have been together, but Dad ruled until Dad died. Then each son would have broken off, and he would have been the patriarch at that time. So at this point, they're still identifying the household of Jacob as being Jacob's, those belonging to his father's household. Now it says only the children and the flocks and herds were left there. So now you can read this and go, oh my gosh, they left those kids there by themselves? No. But most of the women did go with them. It would have been a family thing. And chances are, the family went, they would have left servants there to take care of the children and all that, and the flocks, because you couldn't push the flocks that far and all that. And it wasn't about grazing, and they weren't going to be gone that long. Leave the flocks where they're at. They're in the green area. You're going to have to take them through the desert to get them there, and then how are you going to do that? And worrying about getting the flocks to the water and giving them eat and all that kind of stuff. So they leave the flocks at home with the servants. They leave the kids at home with the servants. And everybody else, they take off. Now, who else went with them?
The horsemen, the chariots.
Chariots and horsemen. Why would they take chariots and horsemen?
Protection.
Huh? Security, exactly, John. Just same way that you would today. If you got dignitaries that are going along, and you got a crowd this big, and they're going to travel that far, you need security. And it's one thing to have a marching army going. It's a whole lot different to have the chariots and the horsemen going. And and it could have been chariots and horsemen, two different groups, or it could have been the chariots and the horses. It can be written either way, but it was probably both, because it was don't mess with us, we're the Egyptians. Plus, basically it's almost everybody except Pharaoh that's on the road. And I'll tell you what, I don't know, it was right, I retired in 10, so this probably happened in 8 or 9, that the Duke was having a big meeting up here, and all the VPs and all that kind of stuff were in one plane, and it went to take off, and it hit a goose, got in the engine, and luckily they were on the runway, and they shut it down, and they all thought they were going to go through the fence, and they were that close to losing all but their CEO in one plane, yeah. And so after that, it was everybody flies separate, or at least half of it. But it's kind of the same thing here. If something would have happened, if some marauding army or something came, because you see all the dignitaries are going to have what?
Enemies.
Yeah, and it's going to say money, 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 money as they're going by. If you're marauders, and I don't see any swords, spears, chariots, easy pickings. They've been rubbing their hands and ready to go, and. So they send the squad with them to protect them along the way. So, verse 10. When they reached the threshing floor of Atad, near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly. And there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father. When the Canaanites who lived there saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "The Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony of mourning. That is why the place near Jordan is called the mourning of the Egyptians." That's what Abel means mourning, and Mitzrayim is Egyptian. So I don't know why they don't just kind of put it that way. That's what the two words mean, So anyway, they've traveled a few days, quite a bit. And they're getting right before they cross the Jordan River. And why do you think they would have went to a threshing floor? It's kind of, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, there's probably some kind of offerings and stuff.
Well, not so much that. She said maybe some kind of offering or whatever. The threshing floors were flat, solid. A threshing floor, basically they would clear off a stone, a rock under the ground, solid slab of rock, clear it off, because you threw the grain up near, so the chaff flew away, the kernels fell back down. The animals walked on them first to separate all that. Well, you needed a stone to sweep it up to get all your grain. Otherwise, it's getting ground in the dirt and all that. So it would have been a big clearing, because if you're stopping and thinking about throwing grain in the air and the wind's blowing very far, you got to have room for all that. And it was typically on the east side of town, because when they had those things, because you didn't want it blowing all that chaff and dust into town. Most of the winds come out of the west. So it would have been a big open area, which allows the Canaanites to see them. Now, one of the things, Canaan is on the other side of the river, the other side of the Jordan River from this, or where the Canaanites were. So they can see him down there, and they are weeping bitterly. As it says here, loudly and bitterly. So it would have sounded like a real ruckus going on down there. And they could see it from the other side of the Jordan. Now, when you go over, they don't call it the Jordan Valley for nothing. It is the low spot where the river flows down through there. There's mountains on both sides, what they call mountains. They're not as big as even as the Smoky Mountains, a couple thousand feet or so. And so you can sit there and you can see. And that's one of the things that kind of comes up with Joshua and Jericho. The people of Jericho would have been able to look down, because it's right on the Jordan River, or right up above the Jordan River. They would have been able to look down and seen the 1,000,000 or 2 people on the other side of the river, and putting the fear in them and all that kind of thing. So it's really easy. And even like in that area, when we walk the Jericho Road, when you come out, you're at the top of the mountain looking over the whole valley. So people would have been able to have seen it down there, would have been able to know what was going on. For 7 days, they're mourning. And so the Canaanites said, this is whether they were saying this is special, this is weird, this is something, whatever, but they did recognize it as being something out of the ordinary, something that was enough that they named the place after that. The place, basically the place where the Egyptians mourned, is what it would have been called. And so So they at this time they didn't know who they were mourning. It just wouldn't it be strange, these people from another country all of a sudden stop down there and they're all carrying on and going on, and it would have been it probably could have been 500 to 1,000 people or more. So verse 12, Jacob's sons did as he commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan, buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah in their memory, which Abraham bought as a burial place from Ephraim the Hittite, along with the field. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt together with his brothers and all the others who had gone with him to bury his father. So now the other thing too, that's from the Jordan River to Hebron is not Hebron's about halfway between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. So that wouldn't have been just a day trip either. Sometimes we read these things, it's like, okay, they were there, almost like they're at the funeral home and they're heading out to the cemetery. They're going to put him in. It's all going to be taken care of in a couple hours. This would have still been more days of traveling. It's just where Joseph decided to stop before they entered the Holy Land. And so they took him where he needed to be. And what does it say about it? I told you there's one thing that you always notice when it mentions that cave.
That he had bought?
Yeah, that it was bought. Every time it mentions that, it's always this full statement: the field of Machpelah near Mamre, where the place from where Abraham bought it as a burial place from Ephraim the Hittite, along with the field. They bought it. It belonged to them. It was theirs. They had some claim to that land and all that. It's the only piece of property that any Jew owned in the Holy Land until the time of Joshua, the conquest. So after it buried him, what'd they do?
They went back to Egypt.
They went back to Egypt, a whole bunch of them. And now we kind of changed focus a while. We don't know how long they've been in Egypt, but verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you're to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. So, now, 17 years have gone by, right? 17 years Joseph has taken care of it. 17 years they've had the best of the land. 17 years, well, at the very beginning, 5 years of famine, Joseph would have fed them very well and all that. And now what are they worried about?
Forgiveness.
Dad's gone.
Dad's gone. Nothing to restrain Joseph from getting even with us now. And so it's pretty well thought that, and it's pretty obvious they concoct this story. But they are really worried what Joseph pays us back. And so they sent word to Joseph. They don't go, right? They don't want to see him at this point. They send word to him, your father. Now, who was it?
His brothers.
Yeah, they're brothers. It should have been our father. But it makes it a whole lot. What they want to do? They're wanting to make that connection. Joseph, it was your dad. Because Joseph was the closest of all of them to his father. So, and it wasn't dad, it was your dad, left these instructions before he died. This is what you're to say to Joseph. Now, if Jacob had something to say to Joseph, do you think he would have told Joseph himself? Yeah, pretty well. And so we don't have, that's what makes it so hard to believe. Jacob wouldn't, if Jacob was really worried about whether Joseph was going to have any kind of grudge against his brothers, he just said, "Stick your hand under my thigh and swear to me," just like he did on the rest of it, with taking him and burying him and all that kind of stuff. And with he was pretty straight about telling Joseph. Joseph said, "Hey, Father, you got your hands crossed on the boys," and he said, "I know. This is the way it's going to be." So Jacob didn't have any problem telling Joseph what he thought, and bury me over there, and all that sort of thing. So Joseph, being as smart as he was, I'm sure saw through this too. So this is what you're to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers' sins and the wrongs, and they treated you so badly. And forgive them, and what? Forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. Oh, and by the way, we're all serving the same God, and all that, because Joseph was a devout man. And that is still showing that he still got the faith at the end, because he did not have the Egyptian priest who normally did the mummification do it. He had the secular doctors and all that, so there wasn't any confusion there. And so it kind of makes sense. And when they came to Joseph, when that message gets to him, he wept. Now, did he weep because it hurt his feelings, because they still felt that way, because he felt bad that he had not demonstrated to them maybe enough to show them that they were forgiven, or to tell them, or to reassure them? Was he upset because they were still living in that fear, and the relationship hadn't been fixed the way that he may have thought it had been? There's just a lot of things like that, and we don't know. But it obviously touched him pretty deeply. And verse 18, his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. So, now why would they do that?
Don't kill slaves.
Yeah, that's right. You don't kill the slaves. When it comes to punishment, they're thinking there could be two options. One of them were breathing, one of them were not. Let's take the one where we're breathing. At least we're alive. And so that's why they offered themselves as slaves. Now, there's two other things about it. Number one is it is again the fulfillment of the dreams that Joseph had, that all of his brothers would bow before him. And also it's the same thing that goes back to the whole cup in the bag and all that, So we are your slaves, they said. Verse 19, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done in the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. Then he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Now, one of the things that comes up in all this that we see is that from the initial time to now, in the story of Joseph, from the time he was sold as a slave, does anybody ever mention again what occurred? He doesn't mention it here. They don't mention it here. Joseph doesn't bring it up and say, look what you did to me. He's not dwelling on the past. If you truly forgiven it, like it appears that he has, then it's gone. And, he doesn't say, by what you guys did to me, I could very well do these things, but I'm not. He doesn't even go there. And what he says is, don't be afraid. By the way, little Bible fact for you. Do you know that's the number one phrase in the Bible? Angels, Jesus, there's a lot of them. Do not be afraid. And so kind of there's a message of its own in there too. What does he mean, am I in the place of God? Who's the judge? Who has the control of life over death? It's God. He is saying, I am not judging you. That's up to God. I am not killing you. That's up to God. I'm not going to make you slaves. God has sent you here to be free. You're going to be free. That's not my place. Sometimes we would like to be that, or to be not to be God himself, but to fill those roles and to exact judgment in the way that we think it ought to be done. The other thing too is that there's probably not a statement in the Bible, especially in the Joseph story, that speaks so high of the morality and everything of a person as this one does about Joseph. Because Joseph all along Joseph's life is one that, he could have taken revenge at any time that he wanted to. He could have taken care. He could have got rid of, made those. Actually, the first 10, not so much Benjamin, made them slaves, taking care of all the rest of them, and taking care of their kids or done whatever. But he doesn't. When we don't see him dwelling on the time that he was in prison, both times, or being sold and hauled off and being a slave, going in prison, coming back out. Joseph doesn't. One of the things we learn from Joseph is your life is going to be better if you don't dwell on what happened, the bad things that people have done to you in the past, and hold grudges, all those sort of things. Now, verse 20 is considered to be one of the most theological. It's in probably the top 4 or 5 theological statements in all of the Bible when you look at it. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done. So, it's one of those things that you have to look at, because some people look at it in 2 ways. One of them is that if you believe in whatever that is, not providence, but where God lays everything out, everything's a plan, and all that predestination and all those kind of things, that God set all these things up to get Joseph sold into slavery, to get him to Egypt, and all those sort of things. And that's a pretty bad view of God. That God would put animosity within a family that would last almost 100 years. That God would make brothers so mad and so mean that at first they wanted to kill their other brother. So I don't think it's that. What it does say is that bad things can happen. People can do bad things to us, but God can use those things. There some of the greatest ministers of history have been those that were some of the greatest sinners. And God took what they'd done, took their situation, turned it around once they accepted Christ and all those sort of things. So God can take the bad that people do and turn it into good. And that's what Joseph is saying here. Joseph isn't holding a grudge because he saw that and Joseph splits it. He doesn't say, God did this, made you guys do this. You intended it for harm. God used it for good. God didn't do it. God used it. And there's a big difference in it. That's why it's such a big theological statement. People can intend it to harm us, but if we give it to God, if we trust in God, if we don't hold grudges, if we live the kind of life that Joseph lived, then God can use it for good. And he didn't just use it for good for Joseph. The ironic part about this story is that he used it for the very people that intended the harm, and that's what he says, to accomplish what is now being done. And what is now being done? The saving of many lives. In 17 years, and we don't know, but in 17 years, how big of a number had that 70 gotten to be? Because in 117 years, back then, a generation was less than 20. Most people got married in their mid to late teens, started having children right after that. So, by the time you're 35, 40 at the most, you could be a grandparent, and then if you just keep thinking about that, even if you just figured it every, within that's 20 years, all of them could have had 1 or 2 more children and all those things. So, was it 140? Was it more? Because, it's not like you just had one child. They didn't just double. Even Joseph went from 1 going into Egypt, and at this point, we're going to mention here in a little bit, he's got grandkids already, but if just him, his wife, and his 2 kids, he went from 1 to 4. There was 4 of them there. Now he's got grandkids. He's got others. So many lives. And it's going to end up being in the next book, 1,000,000 or 2. So then don't be afraid. You intended it for harm. God used it for good. I'm not playing God here. I have forgot it. I have put it away. I'm going to continue to take care of you and your children. Because at this point, it's everybody's getting up there in age. And let's see. I think I'd have to go back. I should have looked that up. But even Jacob, when he saw Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh asked him how old he was, he said 120, 130. It'd been 17 more years. So, it's a lot of time that has passed, and so he reassures them, and he did what? Spoke kindly to him. He still could have had a grudge. He still could have said, "Listen, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your families. I'm not going to hold it, but I don't care if I ever see you again or anything." He doesn't speak in that way. He's still speaking kindly to them. So, verse 22. Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all of his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children, and also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. So he's back to Egypt. His dad's died. He stays there. And he lived how long? 110. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but remember that number. And how many generations has he seen?
3.
No.
So the 3rd generation.
Third generation from
Ephraim's children.
from his son. 4. And so he's lived that long in his life. And so what else did he do following in his father's example? Huh?
Made his brothers swear to take care of him.
Well, no, I mean,
He put the children of that person on his knee.
so what's that mean?
He gave a blessing.
No.
Became part of his.
It says, also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. It means he adopted them. They were considered as his. That's the same thing in the book of Ruth. When the baby was born, that Ruth took it and put it on the knees of the mother, and then also it was spoken to that when Jacob adopted Joseph's sons, putting them on their knees, but it was a way to say that he adopted them. So he made Manasseh's, and I think, and I haven't read this anywhere or anything, but I think this is Joseph's way trying to correct what he thought was wrong, because Manasseh should have been the one to be the firstborn, get the firstborn blessing and all that. Remember, his father crossed his hands and raised the younger up to the elder. So this is now elevating him up to taking Manasseh's sons and making them equal with Ephraim and all of that. So verse 24, then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. Then Joseph died at the age of 110. After that, they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So who's he speaking to?
It says his brothers, but his brothers are all, but Benjamin were older than he is.
Yeah. All of them but Benjamin were older than him. You're exactly right. So if he's 110, he's about to die. Chances are most of them were gone. And so the brothers is family. He's speaking to the family. And the elders, who's ever in charge of his brothers' families, each one of the tribes, because they will still be, for centuries, be identified by the 12 sons of Jacob, all the different tribes and all that. So he's not speaking to his brothers like we think of. He's speaking to the family, the descendants of the family. And so what's he say besides I'm about to die?
But said to take you.
Yep. God's going to bring you out of this place. God brought you down here. God's going to take you out. And why is he going to take you out of this place?
Promise.
Promised to Abraham.
Promise.
The promise. Why do we call it the promised land? Because it was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their descendants would be there. So Joseph knows, and he recounts the promise. God promised this out and to the land that God promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph knows this. There's another thing that shows Joseph is a man of faith. He is so sure that God is going to do what God said that he's making them make this promise. When, I'm about to die. When God takes you out of here, God said he's going to. He promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob he's going to take the people out of here and put them in that land to be as numerous as the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashores and all that kind of stuff. Make sure you take me with you. Now, and he says, God will surely come to your aid. God is going to come here. Now, some say that this was a premonition about the slavery. Whether it was or not, I don't know. God came to their aid to get them down there. They weren't in slavery or anything. They were starving to death. God came to their aid, got them down there. Whatever the circumstances is, whatever that circumstances is at that time, God's going to handle it. God's going to take them out. God's going to come to your aid. I don't know that he's necessarily saying anything about the slavery that would be coming a few hundred years later, 400 or so. What he's saying is that surely as God brought you down here, God's going to take you home. And when you take you home, you must carry my bones up from this place. So he didn't say body, right? He said his bones. So now, Joseph was how old?
110.
110. So do you think that's significant? Because it mentioned it twice. If it mentions it twice, usually if it mentions it once, it's significant. If it mentions it twice, it's really significant. One of the things, and it's one of those examples that shows us that this writing is ancient. It wasn't something just with Moses at the time, and that's one of the things that people say. Well, Moses wrote all this stuff down to try to tie into creation to him and all this stuff. No. One of the things that they have found in digs and archaeological finds of the ancient Egyptians was, guess what the perfect lifespan for an Egyptian was? 110. They have found many accounts of somebody who lived to be 110. And so this is basically kind of a kickback to the Egyptians that Joseph was and it would have been the Egyptian records and things that Joseph was 110 would have made them feel like he was, I don't know if you call it divinely inspired or whatever, to be there, but it was that fulfillment and all of that. So he dies at 110, and what'd they do to him?
Embalmed him.
Embalmed him. But what were they supposed to carry out?
His bones.
His bones. So how do you get from one to the other?
He's going to be there a few years.
400 years. That's how you get from one. And some of the embalmings, we know were 4,000, 5,000 years old. Some of the mummies that they've found and all that. So it is such. Now, did it happen? Yep. I think it's Joshua 24. No, that's not it. Anyway, when you read the book of Joshua, when they conquered the land, guess what they did? And Exodus tells us that when they all left, they made sure they took Joseph's bones with them when they left. That was one of the things that they had, that they basically robbed the Egyptians without robbing them. The Egyptians were more or less throwing their jewelry at them and things. Take this, take that, whatever. Take whatever I got, just get out. And the other thing they didn't carry much with them. Most of because they had to carry everything that they took with them. And the other thing that they did take were the bones of Joseph. And then Joshua, it's in the book of Joshua, that once they conquered that area, they put Joseph in the tomb. That Mamre and the cave of Machpelah that Abraham bought from, and along with the field that is there. So it's a, yeah, from Ephron the Hittite, and that's where Joseph was, probably still is today, if nobody really knows where that point is. So with that, we're done about 10 minutes early, because we're done with, oh, no, that the other thing. And then after they embalmed him, they placed him in a coffin. Where?
In Egypt.
In Egypt. They didn't take him back to begin with. It would have probably been an insult to the Egyptians for them to carry Joseph out, because Joseph was, the second in command. Only the Pharaoh was more important than him, and it would have been a real slam at them. And it's almost as if Joseph knows. Joseph is telling them, "Don't take me back now, like I did my father. Don't take me back yet. Embalm me, put me in a coffin, but when the time comes, all these folks will be dead too. At that time, carry me out of here." Now, he didn't know whether it was going to be 50 years, 10 years, 5 years, or 430 years. He just knew it was going to happen. When it happens, make sure I go with you. So the other thing, too, is that it's really interesting that the book of Genesis does not end with the last of the patriarchs. Joseph was not one of the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And so it doesn't end with them. It ends with Joseph and with the people, and with what? The promise of the promised land and going home. It ends with that. It's almost like, remember the old serial shows and the movies and things? They would get to one point at the end of the movie, there's always the kicker that basically says, "Come back to see the next episode." Yeah, same time, same station type thing. And, or to be continued on the screen. You have some big event that happens, and you got to come back to see what's going on. That's kind of what it's saying here. To be continued. They're going to be going out. They're going to be going back to the promised land. It's not over. The patriarchs are over. The story's not over. And actually, and it's one of those things too that it doesn't go for, like we said, from one generation to, that it doesn't happen with Joseph's sons, his grandkids, or anybody else. It's going to be about 400 years or so, or more than 400 years before it actually, the next chapter or the next book picks up, which is one of those things too we have a tendency to read. We go from Genesis and we pick it up, and it says, well, there was a Pharaoh that came up and didn't know Joseph. Okay, well, that was probably the one right after. We're thinking Joseph died, and then the next guy doesn't know, but it's no. There was a whole bunch of historical things that happened in the middle to bring that all about. So anyway, that's about the end of her. So hope you got something out of the book of Genesis, and the book that means the beginning, and that's the book. Most of the Old Testament books by the Jews are named by the first word or two words of the Bible. So we say in the beginning. Theirs just says in beginning. That word is Genesis, and actually Exodus means to leave. So that's But anyway, hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you had a good time, got something out of it, and we'll see you next week for the next go around. Same time, same station. So go out, be blessed, be a blessing to others.